Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Bowinn, Minister of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, speaking to you today from the territories of the Squamish, the Musqueam, and the Tsleil-Waututh peoples. Before I get into today's update, I want to take a moment to speak directly to the people who have lost their homes to wildfires. The impacts left by these fires are deep. But I know that it is not just the physical space that makes a home. It is the love, the memories, and the shared experiences. I cannot comprehend the pain that many of you are going through at this time. But I do know that the spirit of British Columbians lives in our compassionate support for one another, and that you are not alone. Your neighbors, your community, your province is with you. As people go through evacuations and experience a deep sense of loss, it's incredibly important that we look out for one another and pay close attention to our mental health. The province, health authorities, and other agencies are working to connect people to vital mental health services during this incredibly difficult time. As part of that work, we deployed disaster psychological support teams to reception centers in the interior. These compassionate teams use a community wellness approach to give people the tools they need to reduce their level of emotional distress. First Nations Health Authority staff are also attending reception centers to support Indigenous peoples in accessing culturally safe wellness counseling services and traditional wellness resources. If you need mental health supports or just want somebody to talk to, please call the BC Mental Health Supports line for free at 310-6789. Again, that number is 310-6789. They are available to help 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Additionally, youth aged 12 to 24 can access virtual supports on the Foundry BC app and at foundrybc.ca. I cannot understate how important these tools are. If you need someone to talk to, please do not hesitate. Over the past weekend, numerous evacuation orders have been downgraded and rescinded in parts of the Okanagan, but we are still in very challenging and dynamic times. As of this morning, there are more than 8,000 people on evacuation order and nearly 54,000 people on evacuation alert. The BC Wildfire Service, local governments, and First Nations are working diligently to assess the situation and make sure that areas are safe before people can return to their home. Keeping people safe is our first priority. As soon as it is safe, you'll be allowed to return to your community. While the situation has momentarily stabilized in the Okanagan, now is not the time to let our guard down. Yesterday, the warming and drying trend continued with above seasonal temperatures in the south and the north. There are several heat warnings in effect in Peace River, in Fort Nelson, and North Coast Inland. We have all seen how quickly the situation can change in a 24-hour period. Please continue to be prepared, have an emergency plan and a grab-and-go kit ready for you, your family, and your pets. Your First Nation or local authority will provide information on evacuation routes and evacuation reception centers where you can access emergency support services. If you are under an evacuation order, please leave the area immediately. This helps protect your community, your family, yourself, and emergency management personnel. And I want to sincerely thank everyone who has been following evacuation orders. I know that it is stressful. I know that it is difficult, but it is incredibly important and it is the law. Evacuee reception centers and service providers are working around the clock to ensure that everyone who has been asked to evacuate their homes has the support and services that they might require. While these reception centers are operated by local communities, the province is providing support by training more volunteers, calling on teams from other communities across the province to launch virtual support centers, and adding Service BC staff to help make sure evacuees get the support that they need. I want to thank all of the local government and First Nations teams and their volunteers who have stepped up across the province to help support people in the interior during this past week. They may be volunteers, but they are trained, committed, and devoted professionals in their own right, and we couldn't do this work without them. Thousands of evacuees have taken up the support, and our emergency management personnel have been working around the clock to make sure that every call for help is answered. Early last week, everyone who registered for emergency support services was called back and referred to accommodations where needed. This has been a monumental task, but we have put in the necessary resources to make sure that everyone is supported. If you are currently evacuated and require support that you have not yet received, please call 1-800-585-9559. Again, that number is 1-800-585-9559 for any evacuees who are currently evacuated and still require support that they have not yet received. The steps we took over the last couple of weeks to ensure accommodation have been successful. We have rooms available, we have supports ready, we are here to help. Because emergency support services is normally provided the same day it is requested, it is not typically provided retroactively. That being said, we are acutely aware that the West Kelowna Reception Centre faced challenges processing the number of evacuees that arrived there in a timely manner, resulting in abnormally long wait times before being referred to accommodations and receiving per diem supports. I've asked my ministry to work closely with the local authority managing the West Kelowna Reception Centre to look at these cases with compassion and flexibility to determine where additional supports might be required. We are working quickly to establish a process for people who were unable to receive emergency support services due to long wait times and covered costs for accommodations through their own means. People can call 1-800-585-9559 or email embc.ess@gov.bc.ca to provide information about their situation, and we will follow up. So once again, that number is the same number I provided earlier. It's 1-800-585-9559, and the email address is embc.ess@gov.bc.ca. In the meantime, we have worked with the BC Hotel Association to ensure coverage of accommodation supports for people who are currently in accommodation but were only able to register after they secured accommodation. We will also be conducting a detailed review with the local authority so that we can better understand what happened at the West Kelowna Reception Centre and how we can make sure that those challenges don't impede emergency support services delivery in the future at this or any other site. It comes as no surprise that people across the province and beyond have been eager to provide support to people who have been displaced from their homes. While much appreciated, the donation of goods and services can be a logistical challenge for teams already under immense pressure. So if you would like to help, I'm asking you to make a monetary donation to trusted organizations such as the United Way of British Columbia, Canadian Red Cross, BC SPCA, or Food Banks of British Columbia. Before I turn it over to Minister Ralston, I'd like to once again thank the BC Wildfire Service, local fire departments, the RCMP, healthcare providers, search and rescue teams, emergency support services, personnel and volunteers, and everyone who has been working long hours to protect people, their communities, to support one another, and to take care of one another. Thank you so much. I'll now turn it over to Minister Ralston.
Thanks very much, Minister Mall. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Bruce Ralston, Minister of Forests. Honored to be here today on the traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. Over the past 10 days, we've witnessed remarkable scenes at wildfires in several places in British Columbia. Scenes of tremendous heroism as firefighters, both wildland and structural, have worked around the clock to protect people. And terrible tragedy as the full scale of the destruction becomes clearer. My heart goes out to everyone who's been displaced this wildfire season, and especially to those who have lost their homes or their livelihoods, or both. Although the road ahead will be challenging, I want all those people to know that we are there for them when the time comes. But unfortunately, we are still in the midst of one of our most challenging wildfire seasons on record. It is not over by any means. It has been heartening to watch many people return home in recent days as evacuation alerts and orders have been downgraded or rescinded. However, many communities still remain on alert and order, and many wildfires remain highly active. Unseasonably high temperatures in the northern half of the province are causing heightened wildfire activity. The BC Wildfire Service is actively positioning more resources in the north to prepare. We are grateful for the return of the Land Task Force from the Canadian Armed Forces, who will be among those resources supporting the wildfire effort in the northern half of the province. We're also grateful for the 200 South African firefighters who arrived this weekend. But we are not through this season yet. The situation can change rapidly. People in wildfire areas need to remain vigilant and follow all evacuation alerts and orders. The BC Wildfire Service continues to do incredible work. These dedicated and resilient people are now in their 4th month of heightened wildfire activity, with 1,944 wildfires so far this season. We are also fortunate and grateful for further international assistance this month. Additional wildfire fighters from Mexico, I mentioned the South Africans, and Australia are now assisting in the fight. All told, there are about 3,500 people directly engaged in the response to the 376 active fires burning around British Columbia. And of these, 12 are fires of note. This week, the weather is expected to be mixed across British Columbia. In the north, a ridge of high pressure will likely cause continued high temperatures over the next few days, while in the south, it is possible some significant rain may reduce wildfire risks. Just before I turn back to Minister Maw, I'd like to remind people again how much the firefighting effort relies on public assistance. That is your help. Throughout this wildfire season, British Columbians have done an incredible job reporting wildfires using the Wildfire app or by calling star 5555 from a cell phone. Let me tell you that our teams on the ground are extremely appreciative of the photos shared through the app reports. I strongly urge everyone to keep it up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister Ralston. We'll now turn it over for questions. In addition to Minister Ralston and myself, we have Cliff Chapman on the line, Director of Wildfire Operations with the BC Wildfire Service. We have Peter Brock, Executive Director of Regional Operations with EMCR, and Chrissy Oliver, Executive Director of Provincial Response Programs, also of EMCR.
Thank you. A reminder to media on the phone to please press star 1 to enter the queue. That's star 1 to ask a question. For media in the room, please line up at the microphone provided, and please make sure to provide your full name and outlet. Media will be limited to 1 question and 1 follow-up. We will be starting in the room today. Please go ahead.
Hello, this is Maggie McPherson with CBC. We're hearing from people in the shoe shop that...
Thank you. A reminder to media on the phone to please press star 1 to enter the queue. That's star 1 to ask a question. For media in the room, please line up at the microphone provided, and please make sure to provide your full name and outlet. Media will be limited to 1 question and 1 follow-up. We will be starting in the room today. Please go ahead.
Hello, this is Maggie McPherson with CBC. We're hearing from people in the shoe shop that they used to be able to, in the past, stay to shelter in place, but staff at the Ministry of Emergency Preparedness are saying that nothing has changed since 2003. So we're wondering, how has the language changed around evacuation orders? Has it changed since 2017?
The Emergency Program Act has not been updated in that time frame. Our next update is is this fall when we introduce the Emergency and Disaster Management Act, and it will be one of the most significant overhauls of that Emergency Program Act in decades. So that will be tabled this fall. However, the powers that are afforded to local authorities, First Nations, regional districts to issue evacuation orders will carry through into the new legislation.
When was the last time that?
Oh, geez, definitely predates my time. I don't know, Peter, if you know when the last update to the Emergency Program Act was?
Regional operations. I'll circle back with the exact date. It predates me as well, so it's been some time, that's for sure.
Yeah, we'll get back to you. Thanks.
Predates me as well, so it's been some time, that's for sure.
Yeah, we'll get back to you. Thanks.
Next question. We're going to head to the phones. Our first question on the phones today is Keith Baldry from Global. Please go ahead.
Oh, hi, thank you. Minister Ralston, I think it's for you or perhaps either of you. We've had two formal reviews after really bad fire seasons in the past, one headed by former Manitoba Premier Gary Filmon and also by former BC Government Cabinet Minister George Abbott. Given what we've seen this year, that it's the worst ever season, is there an expectation you're going to name someone or the government will name someone to conduct a formal review to see what worked and what didn't work this summer?
Thank you for the question. You're correct in mentioning those two formal reviews. After every wildfire season, there is an internal review that takes place to look at where the service might have done better, where our relations and our output might have been better. There has been no decision taken yet about a formal review of the kind that you speak of.
And Keith, did you have a follow-up?
Yes, you mentioned that there are 200 firefighters in from South Africa, which is great. Joining, I think, a couple hundred from Mexico, 100 from Brazil, 100 from Costa Rica. There have been calls for sort of a national firefighting service, and one of the responses is that BC hasn't adequate resources in place. But do we really have adequate resources in place when we have to go outside the country, in some cases very far distances, to bring in hundreds of people to fight wildfires?
Let me begin by saying that the BC Wildfire Service is an excellent firefighting service, widely and highly regarded across Canada and indeed around the world. At the present time, we do, and as I think both Minister Ma and I noted, do have support from the federal forces. Earlier in the summer, they were in northern British Columbia. They have returned. When Premier Eby, Minister Ma and myself were in Kelowna and Kamloops, Minister Harjit Sajjan, who's the equivalent to Minister Ma in the federal government, was there and certainly expressed his continuing support for federal support. So it is part of the arrangements that we have with other provinces and other countries. We are not short of personnel, and we're grateful to have that international support. Again, as we look back over this season, once the season has passed, and we're still in the middle of it, that will be, I'm sure, one of the topics of review.
Our next question is Lauren Cullen, CTV. Please go ahead.
Hi there. Thanks for taking my question. This is for Minister Ma. I'm just wanting to touch base and ask about the role and help from the province in that rebuilding effort. Of course, we see the continued devastation of more homes being destroyed or severely damaged by wildfire. The Central Okanagan Regional District says that it's asking for rural or remote areas that don't have a tax base for rebuilding to be able to get sustained funding for that effort, and also look at like an EOC model year-round to try and deal with wildfire fighting throughout the entire year. But I'm just wondering provincially what you guys have mapped out and what kind of commitment can be made to help with the rebuilding effort.
For sure. There was a lot in that question, so I'll try to cover as much of it as possible. First off, the concept of the need to bolster our emergency management capacity at all levels of government is absolutely valid. What we are seeing in recent years is that the impacts of climate change are causing extreme climate events to happen with greater frequency, closer together. We see communities that are actively trying to recover from one disaster being hit by another disaster immediately. It used to be that these kinds of extreme weather events would hit communities once in a while, and we would be able to work with communities to gear up their emergency management teams on the fly and respond to the needs at hand. But now they're becoming so frequent and so common right across the province that very important question of how much more we need to bolster those services is very, very valid. And I think that we have a lot to do. This is why the Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness was created several months ago. And we have work to do with local governments as well to build their capacity. There are some communities in rural areas as well that have quite strong emergency management teams as a result of experience. And it is sadly it's one of those things where it's unfortunate that these communities have had to become so good at responding to and recovering from disasters. And there are others that are starting to recognize the need as well, and we want to be there to support them. We do currently have a fund called the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund. We topped it up with $180 million earlier this year. It has had a total of $369 million in that program over the last 5 or 6 years. Communities are able to apply to them in order to build up structural mitigation projects as an example, or to build up capacity within their EOCs and their emergency support services teams, to train volunteers to get to purchase assets. There are streams that allow communities funding to explore and understand the risks of extreme weather like extreme heat and extreme cold. It covers quite a bit, so that's a major source of funding for communities right now. In terms of recovery, I think it's important to note that lots of these communities are still actively assessing the extent of the damage from the wildfires. And so they're looking to assess the full scope of damage and losses, and that those assessments will help inform the kinds of supports that are required for their people and their communities. In the meantime, I do encourage that anybody who has lost their home or sustained damage from a wildfire reach out to their insurance provider right away. And in the meantime, we have applied to the federal government for disaster financial assistance arrangement authorization to help support the costs associated with repairing public amenities and public infrastructure like roads, buildings, and as well as to support cleanup.
Lauren, did you have a follow-up?
I do, thank you. It's for Director Chapman. Just a question about some of the wildlife concerns we've been hearing, an increase of bears and cougars in evacuated areas in the Shuswap region. We've heard about possibly drawn there by food sources like garbage, rotting food with the power out. Have you heard about that and the impact? Does it span across multiple fire areas, or is it just localized to the Shuswap from what you've heard? And are there any dangers for people who are now returning home, or what do they need to be aware of?
Yeah, I really appreciate the question. And I think Peter actually will probably have more of the answer to your question than I will. What I will say is that, yes, I mean, animals are instinctively smart when they're in the forest, right? So they are generally ahead of the fire. They know it's going to have the potential to spread. And that's about as far as my expertise goes. And so in terms of your specific question, I would ask Peter maybe to step into that space around tips for homeowners that are returning home and interactions with wildlife.
Yeah, thanks, Peter Brock, Executive Director for Provincial Regional Operations for EMCR. So we do have quite a bit available from a public education standpoint from the provincial government on how to deal with wildlife as it pertains to some of the issues that come up. So we'll be sure to follow up and provide that information to you. And for me, the audio broke off on if there's a remainder part of that question that I didn't answer.
All right, next question. Next question, we're going to go to Zhaozhu, Globe and Mail. Please go ahead.
Thanks. This is for Cliff. We heard that over the weekend, some residents in the Shuswap area took fire training courses. Could you please let us know, is there an interest in doing things differently going forward? And how do you intend to work together with these small, loosely organized groups?
Mr. Mon, thank you for the question. I think absolutely, to answer your question very candidly, if we've witnessed anything, and Minister Ma referenced it very well, the climate-related emergency hazards are on the rise in BC. And with it, we need to be willing to adjust. We need to be willing to evolve. We need to be willing to learn from the things that we're experiencing right now. What's happening in the Shuswap, I think, is a great collective effort from the CSRD, the Columbia Shuswap Regional District, the local residents of that area, and BC Wildfire Service, really working together to try to achieve a common objective, a common outcome of protecting people's homes and getting people home sooner. In terms of the expandability of this, it's actually something that we were highly invested in prior to this fire season. And it's something that we want to expand in terms of capacity at the community level is obviously a positive thing for this province as we continue to manage through difficult fire seasons, difficult flood seasons, and the ability for us to also potentially have resources to do risk reduction work when we're not experiencing climate emergencies. So training is a big win. That sets the foundation so that people can operate safely. That's ultimately our top priority, is keeping responders and the public safe. And so once we get that baseline training, which I understand as you do, that we offered that training this weekend, or it was offered to residents in that particular fire. But I think the expandability of this is quite present, and it's something that we are capturing and are very interested in pursuing as we head into the fall, and look forward to, our evolution as we head into 2024 fire season.
Zhao, did you have a follow-up?
Yes, I do. Thanks. What's been the main reason BC Wildfire Service has been reluctant in the past to include these people as volunteers?
So before I pass it over to Cliff, I do want to emphasize that the BC Wildfire Service does work with communities in coordinating responses right across the province. They have lots of partnerships with First Nations, with local governments, and with contractors and industry groups. So there is a substantial amount of coordination and cooperation, but it all has to be done in a coordinated manner under a centralized control so that everyone knows what each other is doing. It has to be a basic level of training available as well, training in the people who are being involved as well to ensure safety for them and the people around them. So with that, maybe I'll pass it back to Cliff to see if he wants to add anything. But I do want to emphasize that there are a lot of very successful partnerships right across the province.
It very well. I wouldn't use the word hesitant to use this in the past. I think, as it described in my last answer, is this: we are an agency that is willing to learn and be adaptable as things present themselves. And obviously this year has presented lots of challenges for our agency, but more importantly for the people of BC. And we're trying to actively look at opportunities to get better, to get stronger as an agency so that we can continue to grow and be ready in the face of these fires that continue to present themselves. I want to be also clear that we are putting these people on hire, so they are not volunteers. Once they get through, so that they work in our command structure, is that we are going to have them working for us, not volunteering for us. I think that's a critical piece to try to make sure that foundation is set and that it's fair and that the community doesn't get asked to volunteer within our structure. And so that's just one point of clarity on that. But yeah, I wouldn't say it was hesitation. I would say that, as the world changes and as we deal with these climate related hazards that are impacting communities, we need to change with it, and we are willing to.
Cassidy, CFTK News Terrace. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, directors, for all of your work and for giving the update. For direct in light of weather.
There's a problem with your connection. Can we get you to repeat that again slowly, please?
Sorry, thank you, Director, and thank you, Minister, for taking this call. Director Chapman, in light of recent announcements in East Dome in the north, reallocation of resources from the south as it transitions from fighting to recovering, can the northern part of the province expect a boost in the numbers already up here fighting the fires, especially in the Nechako Plateau?
We'll go straight to Cliff on that.
Obviously, we've seen sort of this shift. We saw it earlier in the year when we went from the north, and then we saw activity in the south while the north got a little bit of reprieve with some rain. What we're experiencing right now, and as we get through Tuesday and Wednesday of this week, is the reverse of that. So the south is likely to see rain. I think we're all hopeful that it'll be in a significant amount of rain, while the north is forecasted to stay hot and dry, which it already has been for the last number of days. So to put it bluntly, yes, we are looking at all of our resourcing and our allocations of those resources. As was already discussed, the commitment has been made to move the military assets back into the north when they're ready to get active, which will be in the next 24 hours or 36 hours. So we're moving those resources to the north. In addition, as our resources come off of their planned recovery time, so their time off, we're looking at allocating those resources, and those are coming up every day. Every day we have unit crews of 20 people, incident management teams, some of the high value single resource assets. They're coming up every day, and we're looking at those across the whole province, right? I mean, our job is to prioritize based on BSEMs, and obviously life and property being at the top, and then it comes down from there. And so we will see a continual flow of resources to the north, but we are not going to start stripping everything off of our fires in the south. We have to find that balance, and that's what we're working to do. And we've already enacted that, a lot of that planning. We have resources moving as we speak. We have resources moving as we speak.
Brandon, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I did. Thank you so much, Director, for that explanation, especially in light of the time it takes to reallocate and figure that stuff out. With the smoke warnings and local smoke that's surrounding the Northwest especially, is there anything that you could recommend to the people besides visiting the website that people can do to limit the smoke inhalation or illnesses or symptoms?
So certainly smoke and smoke from wildfires has been a challenge for many communities right across the province. Well, not just our province, but really across the country and across many parts of the world. Our advice to individuals is to avoid exercising outdoors and limit their exposure to outdoor air. Stay indoors, keep your windows closed, provided that it's not in a heat warning, because then we will have to balance that as well. Have a HEPA filter in your home to clean the air, and if you are outside, wear an N95 mask. We will work with communities to help them keep clean air spaces open. That could be a community center, it could be a mall, it could be a library. Lots of communities have access to these kinds of facilities that can act as clean air spaces, and we will support them in keeping those open for extended periods of time as well. But yeah, generally speaking, it's about staying indoors, limiting your time, your exposure outside, wearing an N95 mask if you are outside, and checking in on vulnerable loved ones as well.
For our next question, we're going to Grady McTavish, CJDC News in the piece.
Hi there. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. This is sort of a general question. We're up here in the Peace region here and in the north. And as you were saying, allocating some resources from to the south to the north there due to hot and dry conditions. Is there an expectation there's going to be an increase in wildfire activity, or is that more of a precaution at this point?
Over to you, Cliff.
I would say if we've learned from this season that when we see the hot and dry conditions over top of the underlying drought that we've experienced across this province for the better part of the last year, the conditions matter, and they matter a lot in terms of fire behavior. So what we experienced over the last 48 hours is some of those fires in the north, which we knew were not out, but they were contained on the perimeter, and we knew kind of what the trigger points were for the values that might have been around those fires. We've started to see those fires that have essentially been laying dormant for the last few weeks find pockets of fuel and start to ignite again, essentially. And so with that, we are expecting to see growth on those fires. We saw a little bit of growth over the weekend. We're expecting more as we go through the next couple of days. I think we'll see how the winds show up in the north through the next period, the next 3 or 4 operational periods, but it's something that we are paying very close attention to and making our planning decisions around. Is that the south is expected to get rain, and the north is expected to stay hot and dry and may see a bit of an increase in wind. So we will move resources based on that forecast.
Grady, did you have
resources based on that forecast?
Grady, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I do. Just in terms of the active wildfires that you were talking about and seeing those pick up again after being dormant for a little bit, are you mainly referring to the Donnie Creek wildfire, or are there other fires in the northeast BC that are of note?
Actually, Donnie, while still showing some activity, hasn't been one of the primary fires that I'm referencing. So we've had a few fires. I'll reference a few of them, and then I'll encourage everyone again to go to our bcwildfire.ca webpage, which has more detailed information than what I can provide in a media briefing. But the Little Blue River fire, which is far up north, close to the Yukon border, we saw impacts to Highway 37 over the weekend. We closed that highway for a period of time. It is now reopened as single alternating, but that fire has shown some life. The John Brown Creek fire, which is in and around that Morristown area, that showed some life over the weekend. I think we saw a new evacuation alert go in place for that general area, as well as in the Fort Nelson and surrounding area. We saw a few fires in that geographic sort of regain some activity level over the weekend. So I would say that it's not restricted to just Donnie, and it's not restricted to one area within the north. It is the north, including the Northwest Fire Center and the Prince George Fire Center, as well as parts of the Caribou Fire Center. And that's really the area, which is quite vast, as I think we can all appreciate. So
our next question.
We can all appreciate. So
our next question is for Chuck Chang, Canadian Press. Please go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yes, thank you very much. This question is for Minister Ma. There's been some reports out there about residents not being able to get reimbursed for accommodations. Now, I know earlier in the news conference you mentioned that there is this new number set up for people who may have issues with their own situations to call into the province, but we're just wondering if if reimbursement for these individuals are considered going forward as one of the possible solutions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I had addressed it earlier in my opening remarks as well. So emergency support services are intended for evacuees who are unable to support themselves with their immediate needs after an emergency. And because emergency support services are normally provided the same day that they are requested, they're not typically provided retroactively. But that being said, we are acutely aware that because of the high volume of evacuees and the challenges that the West Kelowna Emergency Support Services Reception Center had in processing that volume of evacuees, that there are many evacuees that did not receive the supports that they required on the day that they requested it. And that resulted in abnormally long wait times in being referred to accommodations and receiving supports. So I've asked my ministry to work closely with the local authority there that is managing the West Kelowna Reception Center to take a look at these cases with compassion and flexibility and determine where additional supports might be needed. And we're working quickly to establish a process for people who were able to receive emergency support services in a timely manner due to the long wait times, and were forced to cover costs for accommodation on their own. So that's the number that I provided for folks to call 1-800-585-9559. Make yourselves known. We'll gather your contact information and follow up with you as soon as we have more to say on that.
Chuck, did you have a follow-up?
Yes, thank you. Minister Ma, you also mentioned earlier about, I think, applying for some sort of federal funding support in dealing with the recoveries from wildfires. I was wondering if you have any additional details on the funding, whether the amount or the timeline of what when you're expecting a response from the federal government in terms of amount and kind of what it applies to. I think you mentioned infrastructure, but any details on that on that process?
We did submit our request to the federal government for disaster financial assistance arrangements authorization several days ago. We expect to hear from them imminently. They will go to support costs associated with repairing public infrastructure like roads, buildings, support the municipalities, local governments, First Nations, and cleanup and so forth. We'll have more to say about that as soon as we hear back from the federal government.
We have time for one more question. Our final question today is for Catherine Dibb, Radio-Canada. Please go ahead.
Yes, hello. Thank you for taking my question. I was wondering about the costs. We just learned that from BC Wildfire Service that to date, more than $500 million have been spent on suppression efforts. Could you give me more details about how this amount was spent? If there is other indirect costs that haven't been taken into account yet, and how would that affect the budget, given that we haven't even finished the season yet? And from what I can see from the last years, last year it was $400 million, the year before $700 million. So it's more and more every year. If you go back to 2012, it was around $100 million. So it's getting more and more. So how does that affect budgeting too?
Great. Thanks very much. I am told that the amount spent this year directly is $585 million. You're right to note that it has been higher in other years and indeed lower in other years. That really depends on the intensity of the fire season. I would add, too, that there's no financial challenge to the province. The money is there if it's required and when it's required to spend. So whatever it takes to protect people, to protect property, is there and available. In terms of the details, there's obviously a number of details. Probably Cliff Chapman, as Director of Operations, can give you a little bit more of a flavor of what the money is spent on besides the obvious things of people and equipment. So Cliff?
Question, obviously significant amount of dollars being expended on this response effort in BC. I don't have the numbers broken down right in front of me. We can get that for you. What I will say is that the significant investments when it comes to response is in the form of aviation assets and in the form of personnel, ground firefighters and associated heavy equipment. So generally speaking, and this is a general sense of how our budget is allocated in response, it's about 40% on aviation assets and 60% on everything else. So a significant amount of expenditure goes towards our air tanker fleet and our our rotary wing helicopter fleet. As we've said in the past, we have a fixed wing air tanker fleet of 35 aircraft in BC right now, which is more than we normally have. Very expensive asset, in addition to the rotary wing, which we have 130 helicopters on contract with us right now. Again, a very significant expenditure in that regard. So firefighting is a inherently expensive response business to get into. It's those aviation assets really add up, in addition to when we bring in ground resources, whether that be from BC or beyond.
Mr. Ma,
whether that be from BC or beyond.
Mr. Ma wanted to add to that answer.
Thank you so much. It is worth noting that those numbers will be related to the direct wildfire response under the Ministry of Forests through the BC Wildfire Service. It won't include the amount spent by government supporting evacuees and supporting communities in other ways. It also won't include the expenditures by other ministries, such as the Ministry of Agriculture and Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure in their response work as well. So just wanted to clarify that. Those will be BC Wildfire Service numbers. Yeah.
Catherine, did you have a follow-up?
Yes, I would like to circle back to the Shuswap story about maybe some mistrust among the residents and some that would refuse to evacuate. I was talking to some experts who were telling me, well, maybe because we are in a context where there will be more and more, natural disasters and fires, and you were saying yourself, Minister Ma, about the fact that we are in the context where some communities have more and more natural events occurring within it. So the authorities will have to be working with those communities more and more. So how do we install and implement long-term trust with working with the authorities for these maybe remote communities that are not used to having this presence all the time?
I think that's definitely something that we'll have to better understand and learn from this experience. And I think that there's always opportunities for us to learn how to better communicate and coordinate with communities. What I will say about what's happening up in the Shuswap is that we are working together now, community members and as well as the regional district, in fighting a common enemy, which is the wildfire, and that's the way that it should be. An organized, cooperative community response is absolutely key in all hazards and all emergencies and all of these situations, and that's what we'll be working towards. I don't know, Cliff, if you wanted to add anything to
You covered it very well, Minister Ma. Thank you. I think you covered it very well, Minister Ma. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. That's all we have for today.